So my name is Jeff. Past and current struggles have included sins of self-protection, control that leads to anxiety and cynicism. But I have a new life in Christ now. We're in a series on Ecclesiastes, and I want to begin with a quote. And most of you have seen this movie. I shouldn't say that anymore. It might be dated by now. Eric Lindo was a British missionary Christian, but he was also an athlete, a runner. If you don't recognize the name, if you've seen Chariots of Fire, that is the movie. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but he was going to run the 100 meters in the 1924 Olympics that were in Paris. It was on a Sunday, and because of his tradition of faith and his conviction, he decided not to run. He did win running the 400 meters, but that was his conviction. I'm not really telling the story out of a sense of duty or what commitment is as a Christian, but I just want to throw this quote up that's famous. He said, "God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure." I'm going to ask you this question because our series on Ecclesiastes is enjoying our life. What do you do that when you do it, you feel his pleasure to enjoy life? It's funny, you could make the case that his standard of not wanting to run on a Sunday or his missionary endeavors, those are the things that truly glorified God. But he's saying when I run, God's pleased with me. I was a student pastor and probably had about 150 to 200 teenagers that I pastored. And I never forgot, I called them counselors back then. They would be called leaders now. But one of the adult leaders in the ministry, I remember she told me that she loved basketball. And she played in high school, and she was very talented. I don't know if she was talented enough for a scholarship, but it had been close. And she was sharing with me, in all sincerity once, and she said her senior year, she dropped basketball. She dropped basketball to be more involved at church, to get plugged in, learn, be a leader in the youth group. And, of course, I didn't say this at the time because, she's already dropped basketball. I mean, you're not going to say anything to question that. But I wasn't your typical student pastor even back then. And the whole time I'm thinking, what if playing basketball is what would make you feel the pleasure of God? Meaning legalism is an ugly, seductive lie of the enemy. Now, I don't want to question God led her to do that and things like that, but I think how impressionable we are when we're young. And all it takes is a sermon or a pastor or something. It's like, well, that's an idol in your life. And we don't really approach our life like the book of Ecclesiastes as our life is a gift. The other day I went over daughter's house and grandchildren are there. And maybe he's late learning how to do this. My grandson's 7 now, and he finally got the training wheels off and he learned to ride a bike. And as soon as I got there, all he wanted to do was show me that he could ride a bike. And he went out in the street, no helmet, flying around, not looking for cars. Yeah, I grew up in the 70s. But I can tell you, the joy I felt watching him enjoy himself. Revelation 4:11 says this, and I'll read it. I pulled it up here. You don't have to turn to it. "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created." Do you know God's pleased with you? Do you know God has pleasure in you, that you were created for his pleasure? Not in some narcissistic way, but kind of in the way when I'm watching my grandson ride around. When you live your life to the fullest, God takes pleasure in that. So what is it that you do with all of your might that you say, when I do that, I feel the pleasure of God? If you don't have those things in your life, okay, I don't think you will enjoy your life as God intended. You say, what could those things be? Maybe it's your business. Maybe you work hard. Maybe you've grown it. Maybe you serve people. Hobbies, yeah. Maybe when you do fish. Maybe when you do hunt. And you're experiencing nature. And you're thinking of all that God created. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't always have to be these cookie cutter, I serve at church. It doesn't. What is it that when you do it, you feel the pleasure of God? Ecclesiastes, we've seen this, is about life under the sun, our life right now. And there's 3 things that we've talked about. And these are the relationships through the entire book. Between God and man, between God and life, between man and life. And when you look at these principles, each one is relating to the other one. And I want to give you one thing just to kind of think about, but Solomon makes this argument in the book. So the first one is this: life limits man. And we've talked about that. In what sense is it limiting? And I made a lot of jokes about this. You're only going to live so long. You're only going to see so many things. You're only going to meet so many people. You're only going to have so many experiences. That's the reality. I've been able through ministry to travel a lot of countries. When it's said and done, maybe I will have been to 20. And when I went to those countries, 2 cities, I didn't experience all of that. Life is extremely limiting. And Solomon, he says that, but the goal, he says in the book, is it's a gift for you to what? Enjoy. Are you enjoying it? What do you do that gives you pleasure? The next one was simply this: God designed life. And this is the hardest one. And that is the chapter on there's a time for this, a time for this, a time for this, a time for this. I was actually talking to a lady today who was teaching this to her son. And she said, yeah, I was teaching him, when things are appropriate. And I just smiled and said, that's awesome. But that's not what that chapter is about. It's not like, there's a time to dance and not to. So, at a funeral, it might not be the time. It's not like, how to be reasonable in your choices. It's not about social awareness. It's about the good and the bad in your life God's designed in his sovereignty. And when you get into the most difficult things, he gives you a little glimpse into eternity and says, only one day will these things make sense. So God's designed life, but then life is to glorify God. And I shared with that Hebrew word means it's what matters most. And I talked about that. We're going to have a family ministry we're going to launch, and I'm excited about it at our church. But if family is the most important thing to do, you will crush them with your expectations. If you have anything in your life, my personal freedom is the most valuable thing to me. If freedom is the most valuable thing to you, then without restriction, you will live for yourself. If making money is the most important thing to you, then the reality is you will have a false estimation of other people. If anything except God's the most important thing to you, it'll crush you. We have a huge movement right now, and I love this, especially among young people, for justice. And that is biblical. But without God being the most important thing, the ones who fight the most for justice will become the oppressors they hate. Meaning if anything takes the place of God, it's going to mess up. And this is tonight. The last one is between God and man. And I'm just going to deal with half of it, but it's simply this picture. God reveals himself to man. He does. Now, the flip side of that is you're supposed to fear God. We'll get to that next week. And I just want to give you a hint now. That's all anybody usually knows out of the book of Ecclesiastes. If you don't know the book, the end of the book says, fear God and keep his commandments. This is the conclusion, the whole duty of man. And they say the book's about Solomon was old, depressed, didn't know what he was talking about, but in the end, it's all about God. So I will say this as politely as possible. That's wrong. That is a conclusion of the book. That is not the theme of the book. 5 times in that book, at least, he says to enjoy this life and things like that. So we'll talk about that next week. But if you're like, just get to the end, fear God and keep his commandments, I'll just jettison the rest of the book. He's an old man who was depressed. That's how it's usually taught. Not the case. But this part about God reveals himself to you. I want to tell you from the beginning, before I talk about this, I'm not a spiritual person. I usually I try not to use the word spiritual that much because I never know what anyone means by it. Does spiritual mean I'm going for a walk in the woods, smoking a joint? Does it mean I'm meditating? Does it mean I'm chanting? I don't know what anyone means by spiritual. Okay? How's your spiritual life? I don't know what you are talking about. You need to be more specific. You say, well, it's a very theological word. In the Bible, it means fruits of the Holy Spirit in your life. It's not this metaphysical thing that happens. So I'm not that spiritual in that sense. So when I put this up here, it's not normally what I talk about. But God is continually revealing himself to you. So my question is, am I attuned to God? Attune means in touch with. I do a lot of counseling. Had a situation the other day when I was mentoring some pastors and how they had counseled somebody. And the meeting had gone bad. And things were said and things happened. And I was kind of listening to the story, and they're very teachable. And they're saying, well, what went wrong? And they told me what happened. And probably about 2 minutes into the meeting in counseling, we would say, the person couldn't receive new information. They had checked out. Walls up, defense mechanisms are there. Literally a physiological thing has happened. Chemicals of protection have been released into the brain. It's over. What they lacked was attunement to the person they were talking to. We do a lot of marriage counseling. Just talking, the couple's talking, you're watching, and then the person's over here, and they're talking. And they don't even look over at the person in the chair. They just went from this to... And then they do this. And then they do this. And they're just over here. They're not attuned to the other person in the what? Room. Oh, that's in marriage. Family counseling. They bring their child in for counseling. As soon as one starts talking, the child's checked out. Hey, could you counsel them? Hey, could you? And that's as soon as you get the parent out. Do you even want to be here? No, they made me. And then once in a while, they try to bring their adult child in. And we just say, stop it. Anyway, here we go. That's free. How does God reveal himself to you? Well, how do I know what I do that pleases God? I'll give you 3 things in a principle. They're simple. Number 1, God reveals himself to man through his word. I don't mean like I learn about God. I've shared this before. I went through a divorce. I was the executive pastor at a church, became depressed after that, wanted to give up, don't want to tell the whole story again. But I can remember specifically reading the story of Elijah. Basically, he wants to lead Israel to a revival. There's this big contest to prove who's the true God. The God of Baal doesn't do jack squat. God sends fire down, blows everything up. Hey, my God's real. Kills the false prophets. Elijah's like, woohoo! And there's a wicked king and a wicked queen. No one names their kid Jezebel. And basically she says, you know what? If he's alive tomorrow, there's problems, and they try to kill him. Elijah becomes so depressed, he goes off by himself. He's off by himself. He says, basically, I'm the only one here, a little bit of a pity party. But God doesn't judge him harshly, but basically he comes and he wakes him up and he feeds him and he sends a bird. And I won't go through the whole story, but he wakes him up again. And I never forgot when I read this. And God says, you need to eat. And Elijah's, why do I need to eat? And he says, because the journey is too great for you. That's a weird passage. I remember reading that in the pit of my despair, and it just stuck out to me. You know what God was saying to Elijah? There's still a journey. If you're here tonight, and you're tired, and you're sad, and you're in despair, there's still a journey. God's not done. What's that? That's his word. That's his word. Do you allow God to reveal himself to you through his word? The next one is nature. Now, this is going to get hokey for some of you, and sorry, I'll just give you the illustration. You can make fun. I can take it. Shared weeks ago, had to put my dog down after 14 years. It was a big deal to me. I'm not joking. I like my dog better than probably most people. Okay? Sorry. Waited a while. My wife, Jana, let's go get another dog. Same breed, wayside waifs, rescue again. Brought that little dog. Bought it. Don't tell anyone. We do take it off leash to parks. No one was around. Let's see what this dog, who's been confined a little over a year, been rescued, been really institutionalized for most of his life. You know what I saw that dog could do? That dog could run. I couldn't believe it. Stinking fast. I felt joy watching that dog run in nature. Really? Yeah. Sometimes I think God speaks to me more in those times than religious settings. Does God speak to you through nature? Do you see the beauty of this world and all that he's created? Are you still in awe of it? Because if you lose that, you're not going to enjoy your life. Finally, the last one, God reveals himself through common grace. Things we observe, things we learn, good advice from people, like sitting in a region group and someone in the group says something about their story and God speaks to you through their what? Story. I'll leave you with this thought. Global missions. The number one way God reveals himself to you is in Jesus Christ. We live in a highly technological, globalized world now. You ever wonder why we would send a physical missionary to another people group and tell them about Jesus? Why not just email them the gospel? Why not attach a YouTube video? You can do that. Why spend all the money and training to send people to other places? I mean, I think like that. Maybe you don't. You know what? Christianity is intended to be modeled. You have to watch somebody live it. We need a parenting class. Your kids are watching you. That's the class. Jesus came. And here's how he revealed himself. Little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. And you will seek me. And as I said to the Jews, where I'm going, you cannot come. He's about to die. So now I say to you, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this will all know you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. The reason Jesus came was not just to atone for our sin and raise from the dead. He came to show us the reason for which we were created. You will enjoy your life when the obsession of your life becomes love. There is no other way to do it. Any form of religion or Christianity that doesn't make the main thing will leave you missing out. My prayer through Regen is God will reveal himself through his word, through nature, through common grace, but most of all, when you look at Jesus Christ, you will see God, and you will know he takes pleasure in you.